of a exposition on the Megillah. And this actually started on Daf Yud Amud Beis, but we are holding now Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, that's 11a. And in order to help people find the place, I decided we'll go a little bit back and we'll start from the top of the page. The top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 11a. That would be 11a1 in the art scroll. And we'll start with Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa. So basically what we've been saying until now is that when rabbis would get up to give a drasha on the Megillah, the way they would open their remarks was to take a pasuk from the Torah, and take a pasuk of the Torah and somehow connect it to the story of the Megillah, and then they would continue their drasha about the Megillah. So we've been doing a number of these drashas. We've been quoting from how different rabbis would open up their discussion on the Megillah, and so now we're holding Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a at the top of the page. We're going to start from the top of the page. Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa. This is literally the third line of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, and we're going to start to explore how he opens up the beginning of his discussion about the Megillah. Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa. Posach la pischa lahai parshas me'acha. Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa, he introduced his lecture on the Megillah with an exposition on the following verse and showed how this verse, which is a verse in Tehillim, is connected to the story of Mordechai and Esther, the story of the Megillah. What's the pasuk? He took this pasuk. It says here, Kafta enrish l'reishenu banu v'eshu v'mayim. You mounted a mortal over our heads. We entered fire and water. So he explains, what do these fire and water refer to? Ba'esh, in fire, Nebuchadnezzar Harasha, we entered fire in the days of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, Ubamayim b'mei Parai, and water in the days of Parai. As we know that Parai wanted to drown all the male Jewish children. The pasuk continues and said, and you brought us out into an abundance. That was when? That was Bimei Haman. That was in the days of Haman. That's how he would connect a verse from the Torah. This is actually from Tehillim, and show how this was actually has a reference alluding to the story of the Megillah. The next Tana, the next Amayra, I'm sorry, Rabbi Yechanan. He would start to give his lecture on the Megillah from by quoting the following pasuk. This is another pasuk in Tehillim. We say it on Friday night in Kabbalah Shabbos. So one of the chapters of the Tehillim is chapter 98 of Tehillim that we say before L'Chadaydi. So we say over there, Zochar Chazdei ve'emunasei leveis Yisrael. Which means he recalled his kindness and faithful pledge to the house of Israel. All ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. Now, the question is, and the end of the phrase that we just quoted says that the entire world have seen the salvation of the Jewish people from Hashem. So when did the whole world see how the Jewish people are being saved? When did all the ends of the earth see the salvation of our God? This was in the days of Mordechai and Esther. Why? Because we already said at the beginning of the Megillah that Achashverosh ruled over the entire world, and when Haman made the decree to annihilate the Jewish people, they sent out letters all over the world, and then when Mordechai and Esther asked Achashverosh to retract it, he said he cannot retract it, but what he could do is he could send out a second letter to the entire world in accordance with what Mordechai and Esther would tell him to write, would tell the scribes to write, and then they would seal it with the signature of the king. Now, they wrote to the entire world how the Jewish people have the permission to stand up and to defend themselves, and thereby they saw, the entire world who received these letters saw how Hashem had saved the Jewish people. Okay, that was Rabbi Yechanan. The next Amora is Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, Pasach Pischa Laha Parshasa Mehacha. He would start his lecture on the Megillah from the following verse. This is a pasuk in the book of Mishlei, and he's going to show how this is connected to Purim and the story of Esther. Ari noihe, as a roaring lion, the dove shaking and a growling bear. Moshe Rasha, so is a wicked ruler, al Abdal, over a poor nation. Now, how are we going to interpret the imagery in this pasuk? So, he says as follows: Arin ayam, a roaring lion. This refers to the wicked Nebuchadnezzar who came and he destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and he exiled the Jewish people. The Ksiv Bey, it says with regards to Achashverosh, Allah Aryeh Mesuvchai, and the lion arose from his thicket. This is in the beginning of the book of Yirmiyahu, which describes how Nebuchadnezzar was to come and destroy and exile the Jewish people and destroy Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash. So the pasuk continued, Dov Shekek, a growling bear. Who's that referring to? What's that an allusion to? He says, Zeh Achashverosh. This refers to Achashverosh. The Ksiv Bey, it says about Achashverosh, V'aru Cheva Achari Sinyona Domya L'Dayv, and behold, another beast, a second one, similar to a bear. And this is in the book of Daniel, which has a prophetic vision of the four beasts. Each one would represent another kingdom that would come and subjugate the Jewish people. So you had Bavel, then you had, which was Babylonia, then you had Persia, then you had Greece, and then you had Rome. But the second one was Persia. And this, but Tani Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef taught with regarding this, he taught a brisa, the following brisa, Elu Parsiim, this second one, which is the bear. These are the Persians. Why they compare to a bear? Because they eat and drink like a bear. Because a bear hibernates. So in order for it to be able to hibernate in peace, it needs to eat a lot. So he's saying that the Persians also eat a lot, just like the bear. And they are covered with flesh like a bear. And they also grow hair like a bear. And like a bear, they are never at rest. So that is the second reference that we mentioned in this verse. Then the pasuk continued and said, Moshe Rasha, a wicked ruler. Who's that referring to? Haman. This refers to Haman. Al Amdal, and when it says over a poor nation, Elu Yisrael, this refers to the Jewish people, Shem Dalim min mitzvahs, who were poor in their observance of the mitzvahs of Hashem. That was how Rish Lakish would open up his discussion. The next one, yes.
I think they lost weight since then.
Yeah. So
they lost power and they lost weight.
Yeah. Rabbi Elazar pasach la pischa laha parshasa mehacha. Rabbi Elazar, when he would open his lecture, he would start from on Esther. He would start from the following pasuk, and this is a pasuk in the book of Keheles, and it says the following. It says ba'atzaltayim yimach hamkare. Through laziness, the ceiling collapses. Over shiftless yadayim yidlef aboyis, and through idleness of the hands, the house leaks. Which means to say, if you're not going to address things and you're not going to deal with things appropriately and in a timely fashion, then ultimately it leads to all these kind of problems with the roofing and the leaks, etc. But now, how do we understand this homiletically, and how do we tie this back to the story of the Jewish people in the time of the Megillah? So he says as follows. He says, Bishvil atzlus, because of the laziness, shahoya lehem Yisrael, that the Jewish people had. What type of laziness did they have? The laziness, Torah, they didn't properly engage in the study of Torah. So Naset Somesh, the enemy of the Holy One, which is a euphemism, which is a euphemism for Hashem himself, became poor. What does it mean? Hashem himself became poor. It means that as far as the nations of the world were concerned, here are the people of the Jewish people. Here are the Jewish people who are being subjugated, and a decree is made to annihilate them. And it seems as if Hashem could do nothing to stop it, because in the time when Haman started his decree, right? It seemed that this was a done deal, and there was no one that could save them. And for a period of time, it seemed that there was no way out, and it didn't seem like Hashem was intervening in any way. So Rebbe Loza explains this pasuk that with the laziness of through the laziness of the house of the hands, this refers, or through in general the laziness. This refers to the Jewish people's laziness in learning Torah, and as a result of that, it made Hashem look poor. And
are we saying that the Jews then are the enemy of Hashem because of what they did not do, because they were lazy?
No. We're
What's
saying
the euphemism about the enemy of Hashem?
That we're talking about Hashem himself. We don't want to say Hashem himself is poor, so we say the enemies of Hashem as the euphemism to be able to refer back to Hashem. We understand what it's saying, but we don't want to actually explicitly say that with our mouth. So, excuse me. Ve'ein mach ella ani, right? When we say the word mach, this certainly means poor, shenema, like it says. This is a pasuk in the book of Vayikra, where it talks about when a person makes a vow to donate the equivalent of the value of somebody else. So what happens if this person is too poor to be able to pay that evaluation? That's what the pasuk says. And if he is too poor for the assessment, so therefore we see that mach, it refers to being poor, right? So when it says ba'atzaltayim yimach is homiletically interpreted over here as making poor. Now, how do we know that this is referring to Hashem? Because when it says the word Mekoreh, ve'ein Mekoreh Elo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the word Mekoreh certainly means HaKadosh Baruch Hu, means Hashem. Shenema, like it says, HaMekoreh v'Mayim Al Yosef. It says with regards to Hashem, who roofs, that's Mekoreh, his upper chambers with water. So we're saying, Ba'asatayim Yimach HaMekoreh, right? Through laziness, the ceiling collapses. We're interpreting it as through laziness, we're causing the roofer, meaning Hashem, to become poor, right? So because because of the decree, which it seemed like Hashem wasn't able to annul. Obviously, ultimately he was, but that's the way Rebbe Loza opened up his discussion on the Megillah. He took this pasuk from Keheles and he tied it back to the story of Purim.
Can I ask, just to me, the analogy is, again, the roofs, his upper chambers with water. To me, it's almost an interpretation that God is crying, his roof, above him, because of the lack of the Jews in being dedicated to Hashem.
Right. However, although that sounds like a good interpretation,
well, I thought so. Yeah.
And it is true, but the meaning in the original pasuk where it says Hamakar B'Mayim Ali Yosef, right? This is a pasuk in Tehillim where we're talking about the greatness of Hashem, and the greatness of Hashem is that when Hashem separated the higher waters and the lower waters, right? So since the time of the beginning of creation, that separation has never reverted back, where there's no longer the waters up above not staying above and the waters below not staying below. So we're calling him a good roofer. It never leaks, right? So that's what it means in its original context. But nevertheless, you're right that Hashem definitely was crying when the Jewish people were not learning Torah properly. Okay. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok posach lo pischa laha parshasa mehacha. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok, when he would open up his discussion on Megillah, this is how he would take a pasuk from Tehillim as well, from one of the Shir Hamalis, and he would take the pasuk and expound it as follows. It says Shir Hamalis, a song of ascents. Lulei Hashem shahoya lanu yom mana Yisrael. Had not Hashem been with us, let Yisrael declare it now. Lulei Hashem shahoya lanu b'kubalenu adam. Had not Hashem been with us when a man rose up against us. What does that mean? It means if not for Hashem, we would be finished. When a man rose up against us. Now, who's this man? We're not obviously referring to a king, because we would have said Melech, we would have said a king. So who's that man? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok explains, Adam v'lo Melech, the pasuk specifies a man and not a king, because this is a reference to Haman, who was not a king. He was just a man. And so that's how he explains the pasuk. Now, the next one, Rava, pasach Rava, when he introduced his lecture on the Megillah, he would take this pasuk and he would expound how it is connected to the story of Purim. What's the pasuk? This is a pasuk from the book of Mishlei, Proverbs. It says as follows: Birveis tzadikim yismacha'am. When the righteous are exalted, the people rejoice. Uvim shel rasha, but when the wicked rule, ye'onach, the people sigh. Right? So now let's explain how this is connected to Purim. When the righteous are exalted, that the people rejoice. Who's this referring to? Mordechai and Esther. This refers to Mordechai and Esther. How do we know that the people will rejoice when Mordechai and Esther, the rule, is Techsiv? Because it says, it says, after Mordechai came out, wearing all these royal garments, and Haman was hung, and everything turned around, and Mordechai and Esther became the rulers, so to speak. So then it says, and the city of Shushan was cheerful and glad, right? So now, Ovim Shel Rasha Ye'onach, when the wicked rule, the people sigh. Zeh Haman. This refers to Haman. As it says in the pasuk, V'ha'ir Shushan Naveicha. It says with regards to when Haman was at the height of his career, right? It says over there in the Megillah, but the city of Shushan was bewildered, and they were all sad and sighing because Haman issued this decree to annihilate the Jewish people. Okay. The next Tana we have is Rav Masna, the Amira, Rav Masna Amar Mehacha. Rav Masna, when he introduced the lecture, he would start from here. It says in the pasuk. This is a pasuk in the book of Dvarim. It says as follows, talking about the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. Kimi goy godel sheloi elikim krevim elav. For what nation is so great that has Hashem close to it? That goes on to say that whenever we call out to Hashem, Hashem listens to us. This is something that took place when the Jewish people cried out to Hashem, despite them having sinned. Nevertheless, when they called out to Hashem, Hashem listened to them and Hashem saved them. Rav Ashi Amar Mahacha, Rav Ashi, when he would lecture on Esther, he would start with the following pasuk. It says, Oy Anisa Elikim v'Gomer, or has any God done miracles, etc. Which over there, what it says is that Hashem came and did miracles, taking out one nation from another nation. And as the Maharsha explains, the connection between this pasuk and the story of Esther is that just like in Mitzrayim, right? The Egyptians tried to what? To drown the Jewish people. So Hashem took that nation and put them in place of the Jewish people, and ultimately they were drowned. So too in the time of Haman, right? When they tried to annihilate the Jewish people, they too were annihilated through miracles, right? So now, okay. Now we go back, and here, from this point on, we're going to start expounding the Megillah, right? We're going to go through the Megillah, and we'll start from the beginning, and it almost feels like we're going word by word through the Megillah. So let's start. Okay, we're Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph. If you're in the art scroll, it's 11a2. Vayihi bimei Achashverosh, and it was in the days of Achashverosh. Amar Rav says the word Vayihi is a composite of two words, Vai and Vihi, right? Vai and he, right? What's that? Vai means woe, and he is mourning, right? So that's the combination. With reference to this, it's written, and you will sell yourselves there to your enemies as slaves and bondwomen, right? But then what it says over there, it says, it continues on over there, it says there's no one to buy. And the way this is connected to the story of Purim and Achashverosh is because Haman made a decree that no one should be allowed to purchase any Jew as a slave. Perhaps, maybe, if somebody owned the Jew as a slave, then that Jew would not have been under that same decree to be killed. So Haman made a decree that no person was allowed to buy a Jewish slave, and this would be the fulfillment of this pasuk, which is in the Teichach, in the rebuke of the Jewish people, where it says that you will sell yourselves to your enemies as slaves, and no one will buy you. Okay, Shmuel Amar. Yeah.
The breaking up of the word Vayehi.
Yeah.
What was the meaning of the first part and the second part?
So Vai means woe, and he means mourning.
Mourning?
Yeah, like Avelut.
Avelut, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Ushmuel Amar. And Shmuel said, he would start from here. There's a pasuk that says, I will not have been revolted by them, nor will I have rejected them to destroy them. This is at the end of the Teichach in Parshas B'chukosai, where although the Jewish people have this whole rebuke being told to them about all the terrible things, but ultimately Hashem says, I will not have been revolted by them, nor will I reject them to destroy them. So now we're going to interpret each phrase referring to a different period of time. Loima Astem, I will not have been revolted by them. This is Bimei HaYavonim. This is in the time of the Greeks. V'lo Ga'altim, nor have I rejected them. Is Bimei Nebuchadnezzar. That's in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Lecha Loisam, to destroy them. Bimei Haman. That was in the times of Haman. Lahafe Brisi Itam, to break my covenant with them, be made Parsiim, in the times of the Persians. However, there are others who come and they say that it shouldn't read here Parsiim because it doesn't make sense, as you'll soon see, but rather it refers to the Romans, the Romim. It refers to the Romans, right? That Hashem didn't break his covenant with us in the times of the Romans, meaning we're still here. Ki ani Hashem Elokehem, for I am Hashem their God. What does this refer to? Bimei Gog Magog. This is in the times of Gog Magog. Okay. Now, we just mentioned this pasuk, how Shmuel would begin his discussion on the Megillah, how he would take this particular pasuk and expound it to relate to the Megillah in this particular way. So now we have a different interpretation of this verse. In a Brisa, it was taught Leima Astim, when it says, I will not be revolted by them. What does this refer to? This refers to Bimei Kasdim. This is in the time of Bavel, the Chaldeans. This is another name for the Babylonians. Shemadti Lehem, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. For I appointed Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to save them. So this is in the time of Bavel, right? That despite them being exiled and Hashem punishing them, taking them down to Bavel, nevertheless Hashem appointed for them these great leaders. Nor will I have rejected them. This was what? Bimei Yavonim. This was in the time of the Greeks. Shemadati lahem, that I appointed for them, Shimon HaTzadik, v'Chashmonai Uvonov, or Matisyo Kein Gadol. I appointed Shimon the righteous, the Hasmonean, and his sons, and Matisyo the Kein Gadol to save them. There's a bit of a discussion around whether Shimon HaTzadik, right? And when it says Chashmonai Uvonov, and then it says Umatisyo Kein Gadol, who's this Chashmonai? In the way we read the Alanisim, right? So when we talk about the nest of Hanukkah, Chashmonai Uvonov, right, refers to Yechanan. This refers to Matisyahu. So others say that it's just a matter of amending it slightly, that it's the Chashmonai Uvonov refers to Matisyahu as well. All right, Lechaloisam, to destroy them. This is Bimei Haman. This was in the time of Haman. Shemati lehem Mordechai ve'Esther. For appointed Mordechai and Esther to save them. Lahafe brisi itam, to break my covenant with them. Bimei Parsim. This is in the time of the Persians, and I just said that the Yaakov and Dukei Seifrim, they amended to not to read the Parsim, but rather it's referring to the Romans. Why does it make more sense to say the Romans? Because as you read next in the next line, it says She'amadati lahem, shall base Rebbe v'chachmei adoros, for I appointed the scholars of the school of Rebbe and the sages of the various generations to save them. So this is obviously the time of the Romans, not the time of the Persians. For I am Hashem their God. This is in the time to come. When no nation or people will be able to dominate the Jewish people, which is talking about the future redemption. Okay. Reb Levi, Reb Levi, when he would introduce his lecture on Esther, he would start with the following. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land, so then what it says over there that terrible things are going to happen to you. Okay. How is this connected to the story of the Megillah? It's a very interesting thing. In the book of Shmuel, we know that Shaul HaMelech was told to wipe out all the Amalekites, including the king and including all the animals, etc. And he did exactly what he was told, except for not killing King Agag and not killing all the flock. He wanted to bring the flock as karbanos. So what happened was, as a result of that, during the one night that Agag was held captive in Eretz Yisrael, because he was captured alive before Shmuel killed him himself, he had relations with a woman, and from that was born a child, and as a result of that, Haman ultimately was born, because we know Haman comes from Amalek, and it was because we didn't completely annihilate the Amalekites as we were told to do, and that is connected to this pasuk that says that if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land, then all these terrible things will happen as a result of you not doing what you were told to do. So that's the end of that. Continuing on in the Megillah, we started with Vayhi, right? That's Vayhi. So now we're looking at Achashverosh. What does the word Achashverosh mean? So he says, Achashverosh, Amar Rav, Rav says, this is what Achashverosh means. Achiv Shel Reish, he's the brother of the head. Who's the head? The head is Nebuchadnezzar, Uvengila Shel Reish, and of the same character of the head. What does this mean? So he says as follows. Achiv Shel Reish, he's called the brother of the head. What does this mean? Achiv Shel Nebuchadnezzar HaRasha Shenikra Reish. He is the brother of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, who is called head. Shenema, as it says, Antu Reisha Didahava. It says with regards to Nebuchadnezzar that you are the head of gold. So this is in the book of Daniel. Ben Gila Shel Reish, he was the same character as the head, meaning Nebuchadnezzar. Who harag? Nebuchadnezzar killed the Jewish people. Who bikish laharig? But Achashverosh sought to kill the Jewish people. Who hechrif? Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple. Who bikish lahachriv? Achashverosh sought to destroy the temple. Now, what does this mean? How can you say that Achashverosh wanted to destroy the temple when the temple wasn't standing in the time of Achashverosh? It was only built later on. So what does it mean he chose to destroy it? So for this, you need to know a little bit of history, where what happened was there was a non-Jewish king called Koresh. Koresh was a righteous king, right? He's called in the book of Yeshaya, he's called Mashiach Hashem, an anointed one of Hashem. And the reason is because he felt that Hashem had appointed him to allow for the rebuilding of Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash. And so he gave permission for them to go back and to begin to start to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash, which they started. But what happened along the way is there were many people who opposed this, and it was ordered to halt. So they had to stop building, they had to stop the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. So then what happened was, afterwards, in the time of Achashverosh, he extended that halt, that he didn't allow for them to continue the Beis Hamikdash, which is, in a way, him trying to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Shenema, like it says in the pasuk, over Malchus Achashverosh, betchilas Malchusay, kasu sitna al Yeshrei Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. During the reign of Achashverosh, at the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. This is in Ezra. And so what happened was, ultimately, is that Achashverosh, participated in those who opposed the people, rebuilding it and preventing them from taking any actions to rebuild Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash. Shmuel Amar, another interpretation on the name Achashverosh. So Shmuel says Achashverosh has shachar in it, which is, in other words, the letters can be ordered in such a way to spell shachar, which is dark. Shehushkaru pneim shel Yisrael b'yamav keshulei kedera. Because in his time, the faces of the Jewish people became dark as the bottom of a pot has been blackened by fire. In other words, this is an expression of mourning and sadness over terrible decrees, and that's why his name was Achashverosh, because it alludes to how the Jewish people's faces turned black because of his rule and his reign. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, second. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, and Rabbi Yechanan says, Kol shezechrei Amar ach l'roshai, that he's called Achashverosh because anybody who recalled him said, "Woe upon my head." Right? Rashi says, "Ach" doesn't mean brother. "Ach" means "oi." Right? Woe upon his head. It's like "oi vein." Right? Whenever you mention the name. Reb Chanina Amar. Reb Chanina says, "Shakol nasu roshin b'yama." Why is it called Achashverosh? Because Rosh means poor. Everybody became poor in his time. Shenema, like it says at the end of the Megillah. Yosem HaMelech Achashverosh Mas. The king Achashverosh levied taxes, and all his taxes made everybody very poor. Okay, so now it says, Achashverosh. It was in the time of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? That is Achashverosh. Now, why do you have to say that? Yes.
But before, I think they said that Rosh is because Mordechai is Rosh.
But that's Barosh. Here, Rosh is an expression of poverty, right?
Expression of
poverty.
Oh, poverty.
Yeah.
Rosh maybe is poverty.
Rosh, Resh Shin. We have
right, Rosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the same term is used in the Maseches Rosh Hashanah, where it talks about any year that's dull at the beginning is high at the beginning, then it's Rosh at the end. Anyway, but when you
okay.
I don't know. So now, I remember as a kid, we always used to make a joke that Achashverosh must have been deaf. Why must he have been deaf? Because it says Vayibim Achashverosh. Who? Achashverosh, right? So funny joke. Okay, so so it says, so who Achashverosh? Why do you have to repeat that this is Achashverosh? So this tells us as follows: that when it says the word who, it means that just like he was wicked to begin with, he was also wicked at the end. Who Achashverosh? Who Berisha Mitchilasei Vatsoifon? He remained in his wicked ways from the beginning to the end. And there's a fascinating point that the Lubavitcher Rebbe makes about this piece of Gemara. And that is as follows. If you remember, I don't remember if I learned this with you or this with somebody else. You'll tell me if you remember learning this, that we said that Mordechai was Ratzui L'Roiv Echad. He was acceptable to most of his brothers. Why only most of his brothers and not all of his brothers? So it says in the Gemara, they were upset with him because they felt once the Nesset passed, he should have gone back to learning, to studying Torah, right? Why are you still involved in communal affairs and politics and so on? You should continue studying Torah and rejoin the Sanhedrin and stay as the Sanhedrin. So that's why only some of the people were pleased with him, but not all the people were pleased with him. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe asks, but why indeed did Mordechai not go back to the Sanhedrin? So he brings the answer from this Gemara. He says, look at this Gemara. This Gemara says, who Achashverosh, that Achashverosh remained wicked from beginning to the end. So Mordechai realized, right, that although they managed to avert the first decree against the Jewish people, if Mordechai were to stay in the know up there together in the king's palace, right, and stay involved in the politics, then Achashverosh could have at any time reverted back to making more decrees against the Jewish people. So that's what that. So from this Gemara we see that Mordechai was right in not going back to studying full time. He had to save the Jewish people throughout the reign of Achashverosh. Okay. Now, once we say that who Achashverosh, and we're saying that the term who means from beginning to end, we're going to show that this is true in a number of places where we find this in the Torah. So who Esav, that is Esav, it says in the pasuk, who Berishai, he remained in his wicked way, from the beginning of his days till the end from the beginning to the end. Who Dasan Vaviram, it says in the pasuk, that is Dasan and Aviram, the same thing, the same principle. Hein Berishon, they remained in their wickedness from the beginning until the end. Who Hamelech Achaz, that is the king Achaz. So this is a reference to a time where King Achaz behaved in a negative, in a bad way, and this wasn't the first time that he had behaved in this way. He had behaved previously like that. So it says, "Who Achaz? He remained. Who he remained in his wicked ways from the beginning to the end." Okay, that was all in the negative, but now we're going to say that who doesn't always have to be negative. Yes, it teaches me that it remained the same from beginning to end, but it doesn't always have to be negative. Avram, who Avram? It says Avram, that is Avraham. What does that mean? Who B'tzidkai, Avraham remained in his righteousness, B'tchilasai v'atzei, from the beginning until the end. Who Aaron or Moshe? That is Aaron and Moshe. Again, Hein B'tzidkan, they remained in their righteousness, Mitchilasan v'atzefan, from the beginning to the end. Likewise, with regards to David HaMelech, with David who Akatan, it says that David, he was the youngest. Now, what does that mean? He was the youngest. Of course, literally, on a simple level, it means that he was the youngest of the sons of Yishai. However, it also teaches us who bekat nusay. He remained in his humility. Katan is an expression of being small and humble. He remained in his humility from beginning to end. Shame shebekat nusay hiktin atzmai. Just like in his youth at the beginning, he belittled himself. Right? He was humble. He humbled himself. One who was greater than him in Torah scholarship. So too, when he was king, he humbled himself before one who was greater than him in wisdom. As we know, he had Achitophel, and so he remained humble with them, despite him being a king and despite him being a Talmud Chacham in his own rights. Okay. Moving to the next words in the Megillah, we said Vayhi, and then we have Achashverosh, and then we explained who Achashverosh. The next one is Hamelech. What does Hamelech teach me? Hamelech ruled Amar Rav. Rav says Shemalach me'atzmai. It means not that he was appointed as a ruler, but he ruled of his own accord. Right? He didn't inherit it, but he ruled on his own accord. Some say that this statement of Rav was a praise of Achashverosh, and some say no, Lignai it's a disparagement of Achashverosh. Why? Those who say that it was as a praise, that there was nobody who was as suited for the throne as he was. In other words, it's not as if he inherited it from his father, and therefore it doesn't matter what his character was like. He had nothing, even a son of a king who has nothing going for him. The fact that he's the son of the king, he inherits him. So here, we're praising Achashverosh that there was no one that was suited to be the king as much as he was. So that's a praise. Others say that no, it was actually disparagement, because what Rav is really saying is he was not really fit for the throne. So then how did he get it? But he paid an excessive amount of money, and then he ascended to the position. And so not every politician that makes it in is somebody who really deserves to be president or the like, but rather it's the money. Money talks and everything else walks. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Before the Gemara was talking about Achashverosh,
yeah,
I don't know if there were any other parts of the name that they were interpreting. Why was he called Achashverosh? Because he did this, or because he. To me, that means that it was his nickname.
Oh,
what was his real name?
That's a good question. That's a very good question.
Nobody asks.
Basically, I can look into this. So it's a good question.
I think what probably is that it was a fitting. Like now, people say with me, my name is Yaroslavich. Oh, I see you have law in the center of your name. Whatever. So it could be the same kind of thing. Achashverosh, yeah, good gazak, good name for him.
But it
What
seems
was the
Rabbi.
question that Isaac had?
Isaac
Rabbi.
was asking that it's one second. It seems that Isaac's question was that it seems from the expositions on the name of Achashverosh, it looks like that this name was given to him as a nickname, right? His name.
Xerxes was his real name. Xerxes was his real name. Xerxes, XER. I mean, according to the information I have, XER, XES the first.
Right, but it seems that even Artaxerxes, right, is I think the way you say it, even that name, it seems is a similar name to Paroi, where it wasn't given to one person, it was given to many, any king in Egypt, and the same thing as Avimelech. It's the same thing. That these names were given to these people, but it wasn't necessarily their real name. So even if
Mr. President.
Right. So even if you say Artaxerxes was the name, right? Nevertheless, that seems there wasn't only one Artaxerxes, there was more than one. And Lahavdil Elef Alfi Abdul, I don't know if you have to say Lahavdil.
He wasn't born Xerxes.
But if you look at the popes, right, you've got this one and that one, all the different names, but that's not their real name, right? Even though they take on these names. So it could be that even Artaxerxes is not his real name. The question is, what was his real name? All right, it's a good question. It's a good question. And,
The king Agwidgan is the same situation.
right. So the question is, what was his real name? And it's a good question. I'll look into it. It'll be interesting to know if anybody else comments on it. Okay. If anybody else finds anything, feel free to.
I think his name should have been Nachashverosh.
All right. All right. Let's keep going. Let's keep going in the Gemara. So it says like this: Mahoidu vad Kush, right? That Achashverosh ruled from Hoidu till Kush. Rav Shmuel have a dispute with what the meaning. What does it mean? Chadama one says Hoidu b'seif ha'olam v'Kush b'seif ha'olam. That one says that Hoidu and Kush were at the other end of the world from each other, right? And the other says Hoidu v'Kush gabe hadodi havu kaime. That Hoidu and Kush were adjacent to one another. Like a shame, Shemalach al Hoidu v'Kush, just as he ruled over Hoidu and Kush, Kach Malach b'Sefer Olam v'Atzefai, so he ruled from one end of the world to the other. And the truth is, they don't necessarily have to be disagreeing. It's just a matter of perspective. You can have two things, exactly. You get two things next to each other, depending where you're looking from. If you leave from the other end of that town and you want to get to the other, you have to go all the way around, right? So you go all the way around the world. But the point over here is like this. He's saying, right, that just if you talk about them being next to each other, we know that to control and to rule over two areas that are close to one another is not that difficult, and you're able to rule properly, firmly, etc. So it's saying just like he ruled over Hoidu and Kush, which were together, he was able to. That's the way he was ruling over the entire world. Okay. A similar case is as follows: Kihu roide b'kol ever hano mitzach v'ad Aza. So he, referring to Shlomo Melech, had dominion over all the sides of all the side of the river from Tifsach to Aza, right? So even though they were together,
I don't have time, but hello, how are you feeling?
mute everyone. 1 second. Okay, so let's keep going. Yeah. 1 second. 1 second. Yeah, Rabbi Shmuel disputed what's the meaning of this verse. One says it's on one end of the world, the other says it's on the other, and the other, meaning Aza, is on the other side of the world. And one said that no, Tifsach that Tifsach and Aza were adjacent to one another. What does this teach us? It teaches us just as he ruled on Tifsach and Asa, so he ruled over the entire world. Okay. The Megillah continues, and it says as follows: Sheva ve'esrim umeya medina. That it was 127 provinces. Now, it says it in a way that is Sheva, 7, then ve'esrim, and 20, and then umeya. So Rav Chisda says, B'tchila, it teaches us that what? B'tchila, in the beginning, Malach al Sheva, he only ruled on 7. Ula b'seif, and at the end, Malach al Esrim, he ruled over 20. Ula b'seif, and Mamish, later on, Malach al Meya, he ruled over an additional 100. Frankly, Gemara, if you're going to make such a drasha, because it just says Sheva, Be'esrim, Umeya in this manner, right? And you're going to say first it's 7, then it's 20, then it's 100, Alamata. But now, Ushnei Chaya Amram, when it says is about the life of Amram, Sheva, Ushleishim, Uma'ashana, 7, and then 30, and then 100. My drasha may. What kind of drasha are you going to have? Because this is the only way you could write this number. So what you're not going to have any exposition on that. So the Gemara answers that it's not a problem. You're right. In the case of Amram, there is no drasha to be expounded from it. But Shaini Hacha Dikra Yiserahu. In the case of the Megillah, it's an extra verse. Why? Michti. Let us see. It says like this. Ksiv Mahoidu Vad Kush. It's already said that it's from Mahoidu Vad Kush, and we explained that Mahoidu Vad Kush means the entire world. The entire world comprising of 127 provinces, right? So Sheva Ve'esrim Umeya Medina Lamali. Why do I need to add and say 127? What's the need for the extra? So Shmamina. From this we learn it's Lidrasha, that it comes for the purpose of an interpretation, and that's why Rav Chisda could interpret it that first it was 7, then 20, then an additional 100. Okay. So far, so good. Torah Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa. Shloisha, there were 3 Molchu Bekipa, they ruled the entire world. Who are the 3? Ve'elahein, these are the 3. The 3 are Achav and Achashverosh or Nebuchadnezzar. Those 3. Now, look at Tosfos. Tosfos says, what about Alexander the Great, right? What about him? He ruled the whole world. So he says, the reason why we don't mention Alexander the Great, and maybe some others, is because they're not mentioned in the Torah. And we're over here, when the rabbis are teaching that there were 3 that ruled over the world, they wanted to find 3 that are mentioned in the Torah, so that we could show from the Torah how they ruled over the whole world. Okay, so let's deal with the first one. How do we know that Achav ruled over the entire world? It says the Gemara, Achav ruled over the whole world. It says in the Pasuk, Chadai Hashem. This is an expression of a promise. Im yesh goy o mamlacha asher leisholach adoni sham levakeshcha v'gema. Right? As Hashem, your God, lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master is not sent to look for you. Now, if Achav did not rule over them, how could he have made them swear? In other words, how could he have made such a statement to about Eliyahu? See, basically, Achav was a very wicked king, and Eliyahu had prophesied against him, and he was looking all over to find Eliyahu Hanavi, and he couldn't find him. So when this messenger came, he said that there's no nation or kingdom. He made a promise that there's no nation or kingdom where my master is not sent to look for you. So this shows us that he ruled over the entire world. Otherwise, how could he have made them swear? Nebuchadnezzar ruled over the whole word. How do we know? It says in the pasuk, "V'hoyo hagoy v'mamlocho asher lo yitin es tzavorim v'oil melech Babel." It should come to pass that the nation and the kingdom which will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, and that will put the neck under the yoke of the king of Babel. So it shows that the entire world ultimately was subjugated, and they all were in submission to Nebuchadnezzar. Achashverosh. And how do we know Achashverosh is the king of the whole world? Hold on, this is what we already said, that he was Amelech Mahoidu V'Yad Kush. Okay, the next shtickle Gemara is on page Daf Yud Aleph Amud base. We'll go over to Daf Yud Aleph Amud base. And just by the way, if I'm going a little bit too fast, please let me know, and I'll try to slow down. But since this is Agadata, so
It is a little, but
okay.
Rabbi,
It's
I
not a
wanted
matter
to say when they said 127, they
Percent.
say first
Yeah.
was 7, at the end was 20, and at the end was 100. Why do they say twice at the end?
Well,
There should be a middle too.
Lebasef, although Lebasef literally means at the end, it means later on. Okay,
Well, then they should say later on.
okay. They could have said later on, but they use this expression, which sometimes comes up and expressed in this way. I hear you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Send an email to info@gemara.org. One thing, these are such delicious things. To stop and think about what we are saying and what we've learned that have such broad implications. This is the most delicious part of the whole Masechta, is the next 4 blocks. But I have one question coming up on the next one. Why are all the Tosfos on the page? Something's being played with. And that has to do with something, it has to be, with the Vilna Shas, because that's the typesetting and that's the layout they used. The next 3-4 blocks have weird, there's very little Tosfos, but very weird Tosfos. Instead of putting it in the same place on the page, on the top, in the corner, neat, whatever, sometimes it's on the top, sometimes it's on the bottom, sometimes there's 2 boxes with them. There's some kind of game going on. I just don't know what it is. That's all. Just so I bring research that one for me, because that one makes
I'll just say one joke in relation to that. Okay, one joke. They asked somebody, how long does it take you to learn the Daf Yomi? So he says it depends on Tosfos. He says, oh really? You learn Tosfos? He says, no, I don't. So when there's a long Tosfos, it takes me a lot less time because there's less Gemara. Okay.
Rabbi, before you go on,
yes.
My question is, when you read, Sheva Isimu Medina, okay? So
yeah.
I automatically go to Sarah.
That's
because
correct.
of the way it's. So my question is, why is he pulling up Amram as a question, and why doesn't he put up Sarah?
I'll tell you question. The answer, I think, I thought about this. I didn't look it up, but I think this is the answer, because when it comes to Sarah, we do make a drasha. That's why it doesn't quote Sarah. You don't want to raise a question that you're going to have an answer for why that particular case it does have a drasha, right? You want to pick up a case where nowhere do we expound upon that verse. So when it comes to Sarah, we say ben Sheva ben Esrim ki ben Sheva and ben Meah ki ben Esrim, right? Like she's in beauty and in not sinning. So when it comes to Sarah, had we asked the question from Sarah, right, then the Gemara would have said, what do you mean, my drasha? This is the drasha. We do have a drasha with Sarah. So we wanted to go to a place where nowhere do we find Chazal making a drasha on the way the verse is phrased, and say, how come you don't make a drasha in this case? I think that's why. It doesn't.
We also don't want to do it l'shevach for him. With Sarah, we make such a big deal. Shevach, what a wonderful thing. You don't want to.
But what Ezra's asking is, if you're asking on how can Rav Chisda make a drasha, right, on Sheva ve'Esrim u'Meah, right? So the question on Rav Chisda should be from Sarah. You're asking a question on Achashverosh. What about the Meah ve'Esrim? You're making an exposition on Meah ve'Esrim. Sheva ve'Esrim u'Meah Medina, right? Why don't you do this? So what about Sarah? And it's written in this way for Sarah as well. But the Gemara could have then come along and answered straight away that we do make a drasha by Sarah. That's why it went to Amram, where we don't make a drasha, right? And ask from there, how come?
Okay.
Says the Gemara as follows. There's a following mnemonic to remember the three things that we're going to be talking about over here. We said that three people ruled over the entire world, and so the Gemara is going to come along and challenge this statement because you mentioned only three. Who were they? Achav and what did you say? Achav and Achav, Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh, right? So what about we have the simon is Shlomo, you have Sancherev, and who's the other one?
Shastach.
And Daryavish. Okay, so and maybe one other. All right, so let's do it. Frank the Gemara, Mesuleka. Really? Are there no more? You telling me that there's only three? V'ha'ikar Shleima. Wasn't there Shleima who ruled over the entire world? So the Gemara answers, Leisolik Malchusei. Shleima's reign was not completed, whereas the ones that we mentioned in the Brisa, their reign were completed, right? So what does that mean? What does that mean? So there's an interesting thing the Gemara is going to be referring to. There's a Gemara in Gittin. In the Gemara in Gittin Daf Samaches, there's a whole fascinating story where you had the king of all the demons, Ashmedai, who came along and Shlomo HaMelech went to have him captured, and it was a whole thing. And basically, Ashmedai got the better of Shlomo HaMelech, and Ashmedai threw Shlomo HaMelech out, and as a result, he was thrown out of his kingdom. And there's a dispute whether or not Shlomo HaMelech came back to be king or not. So this is what the Gemara is referring to. When you say that the reason why we don't mention Shlomo as ruling from the entire world because he didn't complete his reign, this it makes sense to those who say that Shlomo Melech was a king, but then after he became a commoner, and then he never fully regained his malchus, right? According to the one who says that Shlomo HaMelech was first king, and then he became a commoner because of what happened with Ashmedai, and then he was reinstated as a king. So then, so what are you going to say? Then we're back to the question: why wasn't he mentioned as one of the people who ruled from the end of the world to the end of the world? So the Gemara answers: Shlomo Milsa Achrite Havabei. Shlomo HaMelech had something else that was special about him, and that's why they didn't want to include him in this, because he was different to the others. And that was
you want to add him to those that only rule the world?
Oh, right. So Shemalach ala Elyonim va'ala Tachtonim. Not only did he rule on the world, but down here below, but he ruled over the higher beings as well. Shenema, like it says, Vayeshev Shleima al Kisei Hashem. It says that Shleima sat on the throne of Hashem. So since his Melucha was unique, since his kingdom was unique, therefore, because it was unique, we don't want to include him in the three that we mentioned. Okay. What about Sancherev? He ruled the entire world as well. It says, and which of the gods of these lands have saved their hand from my hand? If I'm not mistaken, this is the whole story with Chizkiyahu HaMelech when Sancherev came up against Yerushalayim, and he sent these statements to
Yeshaya.
Huh?
This is Yeshaya.
Yeah, it's in Yeshaya, but it's the story with Chizkiyahu HaMelech, where there were different people that were arguing that Chizkiyahu should surrender, he shouldn't surrender, a whole thing. So to shake up the people of Yerushalayim, Sancherev was saying, like, who of the gods was able to prevent anybody else from ever being to protect their land from me, from my hand? So what does that imply? That implies that he was the ruler of the entire world. And for the Gemara, no, he wasn't the ruler of the entire world. Why? Because of Yerushalayim, which he ultimately did not conquer. There was a tremendous miracle that took place over there. The Hashem sent the Malach, and he killed out an entire army overnight. So ultimately, since he didn't conquer Yerushalayim, he didn't rule the entire world. Therefore, he wasn't included. And what about Daryavish? There wasn't there Daryavish who ruled the entire world. From what do we learn? From where do we learn that Daryavish could even be thought to have ruled over the entire world? It says in the pasuk, Daryavish Malka Ksav Lechol Amamaya Umaya v'lishanaya didiyarin b'chol arashim shlamchain yishka. He says that Daryavish wrote to all the people, nations, and languages that live in all the earth. He says your people should, your peace should multiply. So he says the reason why we don't include him is as follows: because there are 7 provinces that he didn't rule over, and we say by Achashverosh that he ruled over 127. But it says with regards to Daryavish, Tichsiv Shvar Kadam Daryavish Mehikim Al Malchusa LaAchash Darpanaya Ma'av Esrin. Says it pleased Daryavish, and he appointed over the kingdom 120 satraps. These are ministers of sorts, and since he only had 120 and not 127, so therefore he's not included in the Brisa. And I think we'll stop over here unless you have a minute. We could do one more. Okay. Koresh. What about the fact that you have Koresh? Koresh, it says about Koresh. It says Koyamar Koresh. This is what Koresh says. Melech Paras Kul Mamluchos Orthos on Liavaya. So it says that this is what Koresh said, the king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth were given to me. So that being the case, if Koresh was somebody who was given the entire world and all the rule over the entire world, so why wasn't he included in the Brisa? Says the Gemara, Hasam ishtamchui become shamchem benafshe. That's not that it's indeed so, but rather he was bragging. He was basically praising himself, but there was no regard for the truth. It's not indeed true that he was ruler over the entire world. He just exaggerated a little bit.
Rebbe?
Yes.
I was in court when I was with the law firm, my first law firm, Wal Gotshel and Manges. They basically wrote the books on bankruptcy. They were very, very, very well known as. So once in court, we're arguing, and I cited to a particular authority in the bankruptcy code. And the judge looked down at me from the bench and said, Mr. Yaroslavich, you can't cite to yourself. Because we basically wrote all those books. So it's the same thing over here. The Gemara is saying, I'm not taking his proof because he said it about himself.
Exactly. All right, Chavra, Yashar Koyach.
Great.
Have a wonderful
Thank
day.
you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you,
everyone.
Rabbi.